But maybe you can just walk us through your thinking around that US-China geopolitical rivalry, in particular as we're moving towards another US presidential election at the end of the year.
Sure. I think the probability of Trump coming in is definitely real. So, we would go back and actually try to figure out how the markets actually did during the different presidential tenures. So if you look at what the Chinese market did when Trump was the president from 2017 to 2020, the China Internet Index actually went up about 20% a year for the 4 years that Trump was president. In comparison to S&P only went up 13% a year during that period. So that actually came as a surprise to us. And then if you look at the underlying corporate like companies, right, you will see that Tencent during the same period compounded 33% from a share price terms. And that was largely driven by underlying earnings. Right? Tencent's underlying earnings growth was 28-29% a year during that 4-year period as well. So what that tells us is even though people would view Trump as bad for China in terms of the headlines, in terms of the trade war rhetorics, but what actually happens with a 3 to 5 year view is that the underlying share price performance ultimately is still driven by earnings, right? As we just saw with the case of Tencent, right? And then if you fast forward after Trump, it was Biden, and in the last 3 years, the China stock market actually did quite poorly, and it was Biden, right? So one could argue that regardless of who the president ends up being in office, the US is not going to slow down the competitive intentions against China. The competitive dynamics, no one is going to back down necessarily. Trump might be louder than the next, but that's headline, right? Underlying fundamentals are not going to change that much. And then just maybe to touch on one last thing here is the fact that the China market has derated over the last 3 years, right? Valuations are very low. Compared to US, right, 19 times PE for the S&P index. If we have another trade war, right, the likelihood of Chinese companies outperforming American ones is actually quite high because if you recall in 2018, the S&P index after Trump's trade war actually went down 20% by the time December came in 2018, right? So American companies are hurt as well. It's not going to be a one-way